So next up is we're going to modify our Chatbook component in the front end to actually use state. And because right now what we're doing, if you look at our VS Code, if you go to chatbook.js, we have these constants, all chat and test messages. And when we're passing in like just this constant, so it's never actually going to change unless we physically go into our code and change it, right? What we want to have it do instead, right, is eventually you want people to get is make a request to the backend, get our data from the backend, and then place it into chat. And then when this data updates, you want our page to update as well. Basically, what I'm saying is that we want this component to be fully reactive. And what we're going to do to that effect is we're going to add this function or this state. And if you remember, the way we use state is we have this. Let me actually get checkout really quick, and I will start with this next step. Okay. Oh man. Okay, I kind of just rolled it. That's so funny. Okay, so next step is adding this state active chat. And so what we're going to do first is we're going to of course define our state like so. We have this notation is with brackets as well as a setter function. And we're going to call use state here so that this can be our state. Okay, so as a reminder, right, active chat we want to be able to pass the information active chat down, right? And it should also have two fields, recipient and messages, because these are the two things we want to be able to track in our application. So recipient, in this case, we can initialize. So remember that when we call use state, the object that we pass in represents the object that we pass in represents like the initial state of our of active chat. And so we can just initialize this to the constant that we just set above, right? Because we want once we make it fully react, once we make it like pull from the backend, we can go back and change this as well. But right now we're just going to initialize it like so. So we have these two defined fields, recipient and messages, and we're going to initialize them with our constants that we set up just before this. Okay. This is the first part of this. And so we have this really cool active chat state. What we want to do next is we actually want to pass this state down such that whenever our state updates in the future, basically whenever we update the state in the future, it'll get propagated down to our lower level components in the component tree. So what we're going to do is we're going to take active chat, and instead of passing in data as its own object, we're just going to set it equal to active chat. And you should notice that this is like this is literally the exact same thing right now. So in your in Chatbook, if you were to go back to your local like build, you would see the exact same thing. Nothing will change here, unless you made a mistake, in which case I'm really sorry. Okay, but that is step 2, which is adding the state active chat. And like I said, right, understand that active chat should be what we want to track within our current our current chat, which is both the recipient as well as the list of the messages that we sent so far in sequence. Okay. So next up is step 3. But before we do this, right, let's get on the same page. Make sure you get if you've gotten lost so far, make sure you get reset dash hard and then get check out dash step 2. Okay. Now that we have the front end basically built up, we have all the states and props set up. Everything is like completely built together. Let's go ahead and implement the backend. So we have these API endpoints that we defined before, right? We have get, chat, and post message, and we need to be able to set these up such that our front end can talk to our backend and get the information or send the information that it needs to be able to send. So before we do anything else, let's define how we store a message in MongoDB. And if you remember, Nick talked about this just before workshop 8, which is we're going to use a message schema in order to define what a message looks like in MongoDB. So let's go ahead and get started on this. I'm going to go to VS Code and I'm going to do the exact same thing. Okay. So now that we're working on the backend, right, we don't need to, we're going to go into the server folder and we're going to go into message.js. And we can see that we have this built-in message schema it's currently empty. And what we're going to do is we're going to think about what kind of information we like to store in our message schema, right? So for any given message, right, we probably want to have a sender, right? And a sender should be like of a similar format to the user objects that we defined earlier. So it should have an internal ID that represents like that identifies it, and as well as a name. And this format is just the way we write out. This is the format we use to define schemas. For every given message, we also want to have a recipient of that message, right? And so this is probably going to be look exactly the same as sender because it's going to have the same fields because there should be no difference between sending and receiving in terms of like the internal user, I guess, underlying it. So let's set up a recipient field, and it's going to be exactly the same as above. Except I copied it wrong. There you go. Okay. So aside from sender and recipient of a message, think about what other information is contained within like a single message. You probably also want to include a timestamp. And the syntax we're going to use for this is a little bit confusing, but I'm going to walk you through it really quick. We're going to use this syntax to represent this. There's actually already a built-in date class that allows us to store dates within MongoDB. And it's actually really cool. You can go in, you can check it out for yourself later. But if you were to go to Atlas, you can be able to see that like dates can pop up as like actual dates with timestamps and everything. And the way this shows up is the way we indicate this is we want to indicate the type of this object to be a date. And we also have this default field. And logically, right, what this does is this means that if you were to go in on the back end and insert a new message without indicating any timestamp, like leaving that field empty, for example, it would default to date.now, which is just a shorthand for getting the current date. So a little bit confusing, but not to worry. If you're curious about how date works, there's a bunch of good documentation on how it works as well. You don't need to necessarily know exactly what this is doing for now. Just have a kind of understanding of what's going on. Okay. Next up is, now that we have the sender, recipient, and the timestamp, we also want to include like the actual content in the body of the message. So we're going to have this content field, and it's just going to be string. Okay. And this is all the information that we want to store in a message in MongoDB. So this is our message schema. Next step is we want to, so now that we have this structure set up, let's go ahead and define our API endpoints. So if you go into api.js, we have these two routes that we can define right now. So the message route, right, is the post request. So the way it should look like, right? We want to do router.post. And the endpoint in this case is /message. We want to ensure that our users are logged in, and the syntax that we use looks like this. So first have the endpoint as a string. We have this like checker function that ensures that we log in, and then we also have this function that defines what happens to our request and response. This is the order of things we pass into the post function. What we're going to do first is we're just going to go ahead and just like console log any messages that we do receive that the server receives just for the sake of debugging and just because it's useful to have as well. So I'm going to, oh my goodness. Just do some typing. Okay. Next up, once we get a message, right? We want a new message from the user. Right? Once someone like posts this request, we want to be able to log whatever message they send us, or and then put it into our database. So the way we do this is we have this syntax: we initialize a new message, like so. And we define each of the fields. So if you remember message.js, we defined a sender, a recipient, a timestamp, and some content. We can leave, like I mentioned, we can leave timestamp blank for now. But we'll have to define recipient, sender, and content. So let's go ahead and define these. So
you're gonna hide your Zoom bar.
you hide this?
Yeah.
That's so crazy. Okay. So sorry about that. Okay. So let's go really quick how to get this information that we want, right? We have it in every request. We have like a user associated with that request, right? Depending on who's logged in, right? We automatically record in rec.user like the ID and the name of the current user that's logged in, right? So the sender we actually already have all the information for. On the other hand, right, for content and recipient, we don't actually have that information yet. So that means that whenever we make a post request, we want to include this information in our post request. So that's why, like in the body of our post request. So in this case, that's why we have rec.body.content. It's because content is like it should be placed within the body of our request, as should the recipient, because this information isn't necessarily like inherently included in the message itself. So let's go ahead and put this in there. So the reason that sender and recipient look a little bit different here is because, like I mentioned, right? So because because a user's log has to be logged into in order to send a message, the sender actually is like every request that you send, right, has an associated user with it, and that user is our sender, basically. Whereas the recipient in this case has to be placed within the body because it's not inherently already associated with the request. Okay, so we have these different fields: recipient, sender, and content, and we got them from different places, right? We got sender from our request, from just being logged in, and we got our recipient and content from the body of our request. Okay, cool. At the very end, we're going to save this message in MongoDB, and now we have a nice way for us to post the message. Cool. This is our first endpoint. And next up, we're going to do our other endpoint, which is chat. Chat in this case is a GET request. It's /chat or /chat. And we're going to define the function like so. Okay. So like I mentioned before, right? We're not going to implement DMs just yet. We're first just going to focus on getting like all the messages that have ever been sent to like everyone, basically. And so you might have seen like this query before. This basically just allows us to search for a specific field within MongoDB, right? This should be really cool. Right? And we're going to go ahead and use this syntax to look for all the messages that follow this query, right? So all messages that have the recipients be all chat. And what this does for us, right, is this allows us to get all the messages that are sent to like the all chat recipient. If you remember from the review before this, Nick showed off that we have that this .then function, right? It's because message.find query, right? This part of this line doesn't actually like this part of this line is asynchronous, right? So MongoDB is going to go through. You might have eventually you might end up with like hundreds of thousands of messages if you're really cool. And it might take a while for MongoDB to complete finding like to complete this query, right? Because there might be like a bunch of different messages like that you have in your system, and it might take forever to iterate through all of them. So what this does for us is it'll return a promise that it'll end up finding what this does is it returns a promise that will that it'll get this like the result of this query. Once this promise resolves, then that's what the .then like kind of indicates. Then we're going to take the returned messages, and we're going to just send them over as our response. Okay. So these two endpoints, there's a bunch of syntax associated with this. Again, like, yeah, so these are the two endpoints that we need to include here. Okay. So this is the entire backend, basically. What we just did is we were able to set up all the messages that were sent to all chats, and a way for us to send new messages just in general to any recipient. Now that we have the backend set up and the front end set up, let's link the two together and finish up Chatbook. So, okay. Next step is to go into. So if you've gotten lost in the past step, to get reset dash hard and then get check out W8 step 3, and we can continue forward. Okay. So if you remember, right, in the front end, right now we're linking the front end back to the back end so that everything's connected up and we can send messages and receive them successfully. If you go into new post input, where is this? New post input.js, right? In this originally in this components, we had the send message function, right? And we called this send message function every single time we click submit a new message. What this would do basically is that it would just log the value of the message whenever we sent it, right? So like if I were to go into Chatbook right now, hello. If I were to go to the Chatbook right now and I were to log in, have a new message, it wouldn't actually display on the page, right? Or it wouldn't actually get sent to the backend. It would just log it in our console. So yeah, nothing happens here. So what I want to do here is set it up so that it actually uses the API endpoint. It actually uses the endpoint that we just set up, /API/message, and we're allowed to like post it completely. Okay, so let's go ahead and set this up. So if you remember from message.js, we need to include both a sender recipient and the content. So remember the sender is associated with like our account since we're logged in, and that our logging in like defines the sender. We need to be able to also have like the recipient and content parameters defined as well. So let's go ahead and set up the body of our request first, right? This information needs to be included in the body of our request. So if you remember, right, in new message, in the props of new message, right, we need to be able to pass in the recipient of our current chat, right? Since like the way it's currently set up is that new message is like a child of chat, So if we have the chat data, right, like the list of messages and the recipient of all the messages, we want to be able to take in the recipient so that when we send a new message, it's actually going to the right place, right? This is a prop that we need to pass down from chat. So in the body, we get the recipient from props. As for the content of our message, this is whatever we type into like the submission box, right? And that's just going to be the value that's passed in as an argument to send message. Okay, so that's the body of our request. And so let's make a post request using this endpoint and this body. And that's just it. So now we send a new message. It should be reflected in the backend. However, we're not actually getting all of our messages yet, so we need to set that part up as well. Let's get all the messages from our server and complete Chatbook. So this is step W. That's step 4. And you can check out here if you've gotten lost along the way. All right. Last step, right? We just set it up such that we're able to send the messages and have them reflected in our database. However, we actually haven't gotten all the messages. Right now, all our messages that we're displaying on our Chatbook page, they're all like hard coded, right? They're all like the stuff that I put in into Chatbook. So if you go to pages and chatbook.js, like right now, all the data that's being displayed in chat is like these constants, right? The recipient is a constant. The list of messages is a constant. They've all been defined above here, right? So let's actually change this. Let's make sure that we're actually using the accurate list of messages from the server or from our database. So let's go ahead and define this function called load message history. And what this will do is this will get all the messages that have ever been sent to a particular recipient, and then set the active chat to reflect the current state of like all the messages, basically. Okay, let's go ahead and do this. We're going to use a GET request, right? Since we set up the API endpoint in step 3. And in this GET request, we also need to specify which recipient we want to do. I'm just going to, the syntax is a little bit confusing, but it's okay. We haven't actually set this part up yet, but we'll use this tomorrow. Just so you don't need to understand what this part of it is doing. After this GET request completes, right, it returns a promise, and then we take the return messages and then set the active chat. So if you remember, right, when we set up these states active chat, we also have this like setter function that allows us to change what the value of chat is. We can't just change directly. We have to use this. We have to do all changes through this function. And so set active chat should be set equal to. We need to reset the value of recipient to when we specify, as well as the listed messages when we specify as well. All right. There's an error with this happening. Oh, I messed up. Okay. So what I've just done, right, is I've gotten this. I made my GET request, and then after I make my GET request, I have this .then that sets up that changes our active chat states to reflect the current recipient and the current list of messages. And this is what like completes the reactivity everything. Except we actually don't call this function anywhere. And so we're gonna set up a use effect, right? Such that this load message history function gets called whenever we begin mount this application. Okay. So we're going to put this in the use effects. And we're just going to use so remember that low message history takes in a recipient user. And we're just going to define this as all chat, which is just this constant that we defined up above. All right, so going back to here. And so now, hopefully, if we go back to Chatbook and log in, instead of seeing all the placeholder test messages, you can see like the whole thing, and you can also try to send messages and see if it works. Does it work? It works. Cool. Very poggers. And so that's the end of workshop 8. If you want to check out the finished product, you can go to check out WH.